President Jimmy Carter makes his last journey to Washington today. His body will be brought to the Capitol Rotunda, where he will lie in state until Thursday's funeral. CBS's Natalie Brand has more on the remembrances.
Church hymns played as former President Jimmy Carter's casket was carried out of the Carter Center in Atlanta for the last time. Carter's children and their spouses accompanied the late former president in a solemn ceremony ahead of the journey to Washington, D.C. for the next phase of his state funeral. A military honor guard stood watch while the last mourners passed through the Carter Center to pay their respects. A steady stream of some 23,000 people came to say goodbye to a man they greatly admired.
It was just very hard because Jimmy was such a good person, a good-hearted person. It's just hard.
One mourner made her own tribute to the former president.
This is a world of thanks to President Jimmy Carter, humanitarian, justice seeker, farmer, father, grandfather.
Carter is being remembered for all of those roles, and once in D.C., most especially as the 39th U.S. president. The Capitol Rotunda will welcome the public starting this evening, and long lines to see Carter lie in state are expected.
I feel like this is an opportunity for change while he's resting right now.
Many more will have the opportunity for that reflection as the country spends the next few days honoring his legacy.
U.S.
Natalie
homelessness
Brand,
rises
CBS News,
18%
Washington.
amid affordable housing shortage. Published by NBC News. Families with children saw the largest increase in homelessness this year.
Welcome, welcome, welcome. How is everyone?
We are doing well, Pastor Mike. Hey, 10 toes down again on that ground today. Can't complain.
Yes, yes, yes. As you all know, we are here in DC honoring our 39th president. He lies here in the Capitol. I'm a little young. I don't know if anyone here has any memories or thoughts of the former president. If you do so, feel free to share.
I was young too. I didn't know President Carter, so I cannot speak on any knowledgeable policies that he may have passed as president and stuff like that. So I hope he rests in peace. I send condolences, and my heart felt warm hug. I know they don't know me, but I'm sending hugs anyway. I give everybody agape love, and I hope that they can find a way to get through this.
Well, we're gonna get right into our show. We got a special guest, Dr. Rhonda Hamilton, coming on board. So let's get ready. We'll welcome her as soon as we get right back.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, it's a special year. Talk about another team that had a schedule. Rookie quarterback, new head coach. Wait, you're not supposed to, go 12-5 and be this impressive, and they have been. Dan Quinn's done a phenomenal job fixing the defense and making them competitive weekly, even though I don't think they're super talented, but they play hard, they're aggressive, they're physical as hell. And then Jayden Daniels plays a game that is very rare to see as a rookie. It feels like I'm watching an 8-year veteran when you watch Jayden Daniels. That's just really what the feeling is overall.
Steps up, fires, heads towards the end zone. It is snap to Daniels. Eagles bring 4. Into the middle of the end zone. Touchdown! Touchdown, Washington! To the left, here's the snap. He's going to throw forward. He does. Into the end zone. Caught. Second. Who wants to go to the playoffs? Touchdown! Touchdown, Washington! They win in overtime! We'll see you in the postseason!
game against the Bucks.
All right, y'all know I had to show my boys some love. Get them Commanders, the best record since 1991, the great Joe Gibbs 1.0 era. We doing it with Jedi JD5, Jaden Daniels. I just actually looked up Jaden Daniels. Somebody I know, should I say, looked up and showed me that the name Jaden and Daniels, they both have meaning to judge in the name. So it was really awesome. This guy has come, this kid, and has really electrified the city, and in a way brought some form of unity to us through sports. So I thank God for my peoples, my Commanders, and I thank God for JD5. Nevertheless, we have my sister, Rhonda Hamilton, should I say Dr. Rhonda Hamilton, in the building. Dr. Rhonda is the founder of Mental Intelligence Mother's Keeper, and I'm sure she will tell us more about that later. She also is the former candidate for mayor in 2022. We'll see if Rhonda is going to run again in this upcoming election. I would love to hear more about that. But let me shut up and say hi. How are you doing, Dr. Hamilton? Can you hear us? Or is it that we can't hear you?
It's just like technology not to work when you need it to work.
All right. We're going to come back and try to figure out what's going on with Dr. Hamilton.
While she's figuring that out, can I mention something real quick?
Sure.
So you remember I sent you a news article that talked about, the U.S. homelessness rate has risen 18% amid the affordable housing shortage. This is a huge, housing is one of the things I advocate for. I've been homeless, as an adult, I've been homeless with a child, and there's a lot that can be said about what's happening with gentrification. And I really feel like we need a strong voice to go in and talk to that lady that's in there now and try to convince her that what she's doing to our city is detrimental and not helpful.
And how do we go about convincing a mayor that hasn't been convinced in about 10 years?
You know what? I can agree. Totally agree. Everybody we've had in here has been more crooked than an S curve.
Can you all hear me?
Yes, we can hear you, Miss
Yes,
Dr.
we
Rhonda.
can
Come
hear
on.
you.
Can you all hear me?
We can hear you.
Yes.
Can hear you, yep.
So speak to us, Doctor. We're glad to have you. Tell us more about the MI Mother's Keeper, your plans, your political plans for this upcoming election cycle. What's going on?
She says she cannot hear anything.
Can you hear me?
We can hear you.
Yes. Still more
can't hear
technical
you all.
difficulty.
So she's saying she can't hear us now. I told you it's just like technology, not working when you need it to work.
We're gonna figure it out. We're gonna figure it out. But while we figure it out, let's first of all, I want to warn everyone and let everyone know that today our cold weather emergency hypothermia alert is activated. Our shelter hotline, if you're in need of emergency shelter, if the heat isn't working and you need somewhere warm, please don't hesitate to call the hotline at 202-399-7093. Of course, you can dial 311. Today, speaking of the cold weather emergency, today DC schools decided to open up on time, no 2-hour delay, no nothing. And as a result, well, we had students whose parents felt like they just weren't safe. We were just talking about this, Mayor. Do you guys think that school should have been open today?
My daughter went to school. Although I homeschool her, she still went to school. And I felt like every day a child is not within the learning institution is more of a lapse that we get, education lapse that we get, because some kids are trying to catch up as it is.
You know what that image reminds me of?
What?
That image I mean, I can go through tons of allegories, I think, but okay, it's like DC government saying, we got classes for you. Come take your classes, get your certifications. Come get your certifications. Get 1 million certifications, but we don't got any jobs for you.
Right.
This is like, yeah, come to school. We're going to keep the schools open. It's freezing. It's below freezing out. We're going to keep the schools open. We're going to make everybody get to the school, but we ain't going to clean the sidewalks. You're going to have to trudge your way. You're going to have to fight your way to get into the school. It's very similar. I mean, it's just so disjointed. It's so disjointed. I'm just, God, can't something make me happy with this city? Oh, okay. You brought up the Commanders. All right, we got them. Isn't that interesting? They are kicking butt as soon as they got rid of that racist name and that dumbass owner. I just think it's funny. It might be a coincidence.
I saw a news article from 7 News, ABC 7, and they were saying that number one, the bus routes had been cut like tremendously. We were down to 42 buses running this entire city because the streets are unplowed. I literally did like a video response to ABC 7, and I'm like, when did it become the citizens' responsibility to clear the sidewalks and shovel the streets and take our own personal salt that we bought with our own money, and we got the salt alleys and we got the sidewalk? Because I remember back in the day, and this was a long time back in the day, I'm telling my age now, y'all. I'm half century. I'm about to be half century this year. So your girl have seen some things in this district, and there used to be workers, government workers that wore snowsuits and would be walking down the sidewalk with snow blowers, getting all the snow off the sidewalks. Then we had the salting trucks that came through and took all of that they pretty much blew into the street, and they would shovel it all into like a pile along the curb, and then salt was being thrown down before and after it snowed. This city right here done went to the pooper scooping. Welcome back. We can hear you now, Miss Rhonda. Come on, give us some good.
Boy, oh
Can you
boy.
hear
Hi,
us?
everybody. Happy New Year. I tell you.
Happy New Year.
I don't know. I'm so glad that I was persistent. I just figured if I kept logging out and logging back in, eventually, technology gods would have, favor on me. How's everybody doing? Thank you so
Listen.
much
Yeah,
for the
Happy New Year.
invitation. And I tell you, the last thing I heard was the city's going to a pooper scooper. That's an introduction.
It is.
Thank you all for having me and for your patience. Boy, I tell you. Interesting.
Thank you.
Yeah, I said,
Thank you.
technology don't never want to work when you need it to. So come on, Miss Rhonda, tell us something good. I sent Pastor Mike an article that we want to kind of touch on when you get a chance. But give the listeners a thorough introduction to yourself and what you plan on bringing to the table, lady, because we're trying to eat.
I understand. Well, first and foremost, I am Dr. Rhonda Hamilton, and I've been stomping on the ground for almost a decade now. Mental health matters, and that has been our work across the city and much of what's brought me to the forefront. Who knew we had such a housing fiasco? Who knew that we needed leadership that needed to be held accountable? There's so much going on, and as I say, your introductory of the city going to a pooper scooper, I'm excited to talk about the local conversation because, being in this political town in a year of inauguration, it is quite possible that our issues will get buried behind this national narrative. So I'm very thankful that you guys have invited me to the platform. I am a mental health advocate, and I see that a lot of the cities we're dealing with, a lot of the problems we're dealing with in the city can be routed to our poor leadership. And so obviously when you challenge the status quo, you're not very popular, but I'm a home girl and I don't care about being popular because my membership card is forever.
Oh, girl, you got me throwing my arms over here like, go ahead and say it, go. I'm excited.
I love that. You were talking about the snow problems and just problems in general. It's not so much that we expect that, things wouldn't go wrong. It's just that when you start reporting the things, it's this that the responses are not what you would expect them to be. And I don't think it's too much to ask if we ask that we raise the standards in our living and our governing. And to do that, we've got to be able to reach to the population that's not voting, the part of the population that doesn't believe that their issues matter. And so I'm at the table because I want to have these kinds of conversations. They tell us there's a such thing as democracy, but in DC, we got less than 24% participating in our local elections. And that's a danger. That's a danger. So
I love it. I love it already.
Me too. She about to have me over here shouting, Mike. I'm about to be doing it to you.
Dr. Hamilton, why do you think there's such low voter turnout?
Well, for years in our marginalized and low-income communities, which is where we see a lot of that, we just, politics, we don't believe impact us. We don't believe that anyone's listening. And when you look at the cycle of issues that we've been dealing with in the city and the lack of responses, people don't believe that it matters. They don't believe in it anymore. And when people start disbelieving, it is very dangerous. So I believe that we've got to make their voices matter. And the way you do that is you listen. And all too often our leadership shows up and controls the narrative. And too many people's lives are not being changed or impacted for the better. And they get frustrated. And what's interesting, being the seat of governance, much of what we were dealing with, the nation was dealing with, because as you can see, no one predicted that Ms. Harris wouldn't be in the White House. But I think Bernie Sanders said it best, and I'm, not name dropping, I'm just quoting facts. What would make you believe that people would show up for you when you don't show up for them?
Come on.
Jesus.
Come on.
Wow.
Yeah, and I'm paraphrasing, but to the extent is what he's saying is that, we got to be accountable. We got to get back to accountable government. And I think that all too often when our voices get discouraged and when they don't show up, then that allows folks to go on overdrive in their own agendas. And the truth of the matter is, there are too many people in our town with agendas, and that doesn't necessarily mean positive outcomes for the people that need it the most.
Speaking that truth now, come on.
Are you
So just so I got it clear, you are running this upcoming election as well?
Yeah, I thank you for bringing that up. I came in late in 22, came in after the primary, so we had an uphill battle. I am an independent, and I have been since 2012, and that's another story. But the reality is that I came in late in 22, and with the indication of delivering our dear mayor the understanding that your replacement has arrived. You know, the community's voice will be heard, and it will prevail. We will wake them up, and so yes, I declared exploratory about 2 months ago so that we could come out on the ground, have conversations, and just understand that the matters that matter the most to our people are matters that they need to understand that I care about. You know, as a mental health advocate, I understand the stigma around mental health, but when we change the conversation around mental wellness, now we can get more people to the table, because no one wants to wear that label. And as a city, we haven't done the best job at allocating our resources properly. So absolutely, I will be returning, and it's my intentions of running in 2026. I imagine I'll declare candidacy sometime right around the spring in order that we can begin collecting signatures. But before we did that, I wanted to show up and have opportunity to talk to our citizens across these 8 wards, because there's such a divide. And the reality is that we really all care about the same things. None of us want to live in unsafe communities. We really do want our children to win and graduate to higher advanced understandings. But the reality is we have an 81 times wealth gap. And if we're going to do something about that, we have to be intentional. And to be intentional, our people have to believe that it's about them. And so as a local, I'm coming forward because in a lot of these communities that I'm in and out of, we're having the confidential conversations, but their lives are not changing. And that is the importance of reconnecting them to the importance of their vote. And so I take on the responsibility of coming back to reunite our citizens around the issues that matter. And I'll take it on the chin, as I have been. They're frustrated because somebody that looks like me came before me and made promises to them, and they've broken them. And the reality is that we've got to build the trust back in our communities. And I don't have a problem doing that. I work in a field that requires trust. And so, yes, I'm coming in 2026 in order that we can remove this mayor so that we can get the people believing in proper leadership again.
Can I ask you, Dr. Hamilton, just the contrast? So the mayor loves to bulldoze tent encampments where people who can't afford to live in their neighborhoods but want to stay nearby, or just, you know, even if they're transient or whatever, folks are living in tents in freezing cold weather, and they've already been displaced out of their homes. Now they're getting displaced again by bulldozers. Tell us about your peer initiative, for the homeless, from your perspective. How you see how the mayor does with our homeless right now, and people who are unhoused. What's the contrast for you?
Let me tell you, and I'm glad you asked that question, because, you know, in early 2021, we started recognizing the challenges that we were having in our homeless matters. And the reality is that we manage a $21 billion budget, right? And a lot of what we have done and have operated has been trusting that the monies allocated have been properly done. So what we see with this mayor bulldozing the encampments and the reality of playing down the real problem. The point in count, just to make reference, the point in time count for our homeless citizens in 23 was right around 4,700, 4,900. When they did the count in 24, just a year later, we doubled that. We more than doubled that number to the point that we are somewhere around 9,700. I wrote some numbers down for you guys, but the reality is that we know from our statistical data collection that our homelessness has more than doubled in a year's time. When I look at monies allocated for agencies that we have not held accountable to our homeless population, I believe that we've got to do root cause work. And as a mental health advocate, I'm a big believer in root cause. So for me, what I would do and what would contrast, I would first want to audit where our dollars and our tax dollars are being spent. I would first want to understand the monies coming in from the federal government, that find out how they're properly being allocated, because there are a handful of agencies, and I can get started telling you that are just been allowed to be too big to fail.
Come on with that truth now. Come on with that truth.
The reality is that they're failing our citizens. And so I don't believe that as a district and as tax-paying citizens who have constantly watched the decline in our social service programs, I don't believe that we've been properly afforded a transparent audit of this administration's abilities. And so we end up following their narrative. I happen to believe we get more than enough money from the federal government. Our DCHA, as we speak, the head of the Department of Director has mentioned that they have 3 policing agencies on their doorstep, to include the FBI. Now, when in the world would the FBI need to be on the doorstep of a housing agency? In addition to that, we know that the voucher waiting list, for over a decade, that number has spanned over 4,000.
2 decades, because I was on that list.
In 22, in 22, we had a count of about 40,000, and in 24, 2 years later, we're at approximately 40,570. So that tells me 2 things. Number one, I've got Washingtonians whose economic status is not changing over decades. That's a problem. And number 2, why in the world would the number be going up instead of down?
Right.
I happen to believe that we need to audit the allocation of the monies. We need to bring relationships to the table in order that we end them. We need to provide access to appropriate resources. And then we need to begin to understand the true definition of what we're calling homeless, because I've got homeless people walking up to shelters and not being able to be administered if they can't prove that they're homeless. And when our citizens have to start proving that they're homeless to be able to find somewhere to sleep in the depth of winter, then I say our systems need to be checked. And so my answer to you, my answer to you is that there's a major overhaul that needs to happen, and change makes people nervous. But as tax-paying citizens, we're supposed to be demanding to understand where our monies are going, and we're not. And when we don't vote, that makes it doubly challenging. So I challenge this mayor to allow us to audit her books. And since I don't believe she'll do that before her term is up, then we just need to remove her in order that we can reestablish higher standards in our governing and make sure that our citizens' needs come first.
Amen. Clap, clap, clap.
Amen.
That's what we're talking about.
You know, you're talking about accountability with the housing, but I feel like the mayor has fell short in a few areas, and so I just wanted your opinion. This past, it's not showing the way I wanted to show, but this past yesterday, I believe actually, the new council, including my Ward 7 council member, Wendell Felder, finally met, and they finally approved the protection to continue protection against inflation, basically a rent cap. What are your thoughts on the council and its relationship with housing? And what are your thoughts on a rent cap, expanding that?
Well, first and foremost, I think that the rent cap provisions are necessary to make sure, because the cost of living in DC is so high, especially to rent. So I do believe that we need to act responsibly and make sure that the caps are appropriate. However, what I will say to you, when you ask me the question of the council's relationship to our housing agency, I think that is very reactive, and I would like to see them be more proactive. What am I speaking of? For example, we only have one resource to help folks that are facing eviction, but the reality is that we have a slew of affordable housing vendors who are not necessarily maintaining the properties to housing code. And so what we have been challenging our council to do, I met with Mr. Mendelson the first week in December because we presented Mr. Robert White something called the HART legislation. What I saw happening is that our citizens who were up in arms of living with mold, living with rodents, living with electrical issues, no heat in the winter, no AC in the summer, just consistency of housing code violations. The reality of the council not challenging the fact that many of these citizens were on subsidy. So why would we continue to pour money into housing vendors who don't maintain their properties to code? And so when I say they're acting reactionary, they're forcing citizens to follow a system that is not protecting their well-being in their living environments. And so they get forced into these landlord-tenant processes that they have to keep going back and forth to court to prove that these violations exist, and they have no protections from being evicted. I don't believe that housing code vendors who are not properly maintaining the properties should be allowed to evict citizens, nor do I believe that they should be allowed to continue to receive housing subsidies when their properties are not up to code. And it's very, very irresponsible to come out and say that citizens aren't paying their rent, and that's why the ERAP is a problem. The truth of the matter is we have a problem with accountable housing code violations, and the council is responsible for stepping in to do something. So we presented them with the HART Act, which would allow housing vendors to be penalized as long as they keep these violations in place. We also want to call for the interruption of their monies from federal subsidies or otherwise until these properties are brought to code. So I feel that our council's relationship and our mayor's relationship with our housing agency has been very reactionary. We've had problems with slumlords in our city for quite some time, and too many district citizens are living beneath the standards that none of those leaders would live. We invited them to go themselves and live in these communities, and maybe they would be more propelled to act.
You know what? I said that, Miss Rhonda. I said that like 15 years ago. I said, you remember that show, Wife Swap? I said, okay, we should do a housing swap. All of them Richies that ain't never stayed in the hood and don't know exactly what we go through from day to day, they need to swap their lives out with us, and they need to stay there for at least 3 months.
Yeah.
Stay there for at least, because they're not really going to see it in 30 days.
Yeah, and that's why I think it's important.
And we're not talking about, I'm sorry, I got to say this because it was offensive to me. We're not talking about, this is my brother, and I'm defending him now, but we're not talking about what my brother Trayon White did in Potomac Gardens when he came in my neighborhood and called himself sleeping outside for a night to experience what we were going through. We're talking about really experiencing how we live day to day, not a show for camera and not an act.
I'm so glad you pointed that out. So let's talk about that. As citizens of the district watching what we've been dealing with, we've been being handled, right? Whenever it was necessary to get a headline out that said that they were on top of the problem, then obviously that was what they were headstrong to go and do. But just as you mentioned, sleeping outside one night doesn't change the reality for families that sleep there 365 days of the year. And since you brought up Mr. Trayon White, let's talk about that, because the reality for many of these communities that we saw dealing with these housing code violations, they were existing in Ward 8. And so when we look at the ongoing support for Mr. White and any of the other council members, I say let's have a fair conversation, because the reality is there are too many families who went without on his watch. And when you ask what is he supposed to do, well, he's supposed to make sure that there are not landlords that are benefiting on the backs of his constituents when their living environments are in jeopardy and have been for quite some time. The reality is that as a public official and elected leader, you don't get to pick and choose which issues you want to address, especially when the issues that you're not addressing places so many of your constituents in danger. So I want to have real life conversations because our children are being impacted by it. And as you mentioned in the beginning of your narrative, the mayor has failed in more than just the housing arena, in my opinion. Our healthcare issues are an issue. The reality that DC ranks high in sex trafficking in the top 3, and a lot of people don't realize that. It's because they're picking and choosing what information they put before us. We have so many citizens that could live a better quality of life if we just had a mayor that didn't have an agenda that fed the developers over the people's issues.
Right.
Yeah, and so there's a lot that we have to address. Our outcomes of our children. We many people are probably going to be disappointed to hear me call it out, but we pay for a two-headed snake in our education system. We pay for a charter model and we pay for a public model, and we're still not winning the war on advancing our children to higher educational and career understandings. And let's face it, $17.50 an hour is not going to create homeowners unless we're intentional about how we're going to approach these matters. And so I believe that we are excited to have the opportunity to bring our home team home, the RFK Stadium project. But let's remember and let's watch this mayor's pattern of behavior. When we saved the Ted Leonis deal, she came after SNAP right afterwards and then pulled the contract from the DC circulator workers after awarding them a 5-year understanding. So what we understand this mayor's mode of operation to be is that to save these sports franchises, possibly our low-income and working class families come under attack from the resources being pulled back. So this is the danger of us not voting, because we're not vocal enough to force this conversation in the court of public opinion to win back the trust of so many of our citizens who have been ignored. So yes, this mayor has failed in many ways, and it's our responsibility to hold her accountable.
Amen. Amen.
And I haven't even talked about the mental health, because I'm the mental health advocate. So that's just the elephant in the room. That's a whole nother show. But just know that we definitely intend to reform much of what we see not working. And it starts with auditing our money to find out what they've been doing with it.
And I totally agree with you on that, Dr. Rhonda. I'm a mental health advocate myself, mainly because I experienced postpartum depression when I had my first child, and I didn't know what that was, what I was feeling, and I had to seek some help for it. And fast forward into 2020, well, actually 2019 is when I actually said this. At the end of December, I was saying that we needed more mental health care workers. And then the pandemic shut the whole world down. And next thing you know, suicide rates are up.
Absolutely.
What was the other thing? They were saying in the news that there weren't enough therapists to cover the amount of people that needed services. So as a person who deals with mental health issues and have dealt with them for 3 decades, I fight for the people who are like me that don't have a voice, and they feel like, oh, well, the labels. They don't want to speak up because of the labels. Look, I told them, I said, stick them labels on me like bumper stickers, baby, and I'm going to wear them. Okay? I'm gonna show
bless
you. I'm gonna show you what mental health look like. I make this look good.
Absolutely, you do. And thank you for your word, and thank you for your work. And absolutely, in low income and marginalized communities, the last thing we want to do is to have a label stuck to us, like you said. But the truth of the matter is that we've got to normalize the conversation. And the way we do that is we help people understand what the true definition of mental health is. Because for far too long, people associated mental health with institutionalized care, with
Right.
being in front of a doctor with a white coat, when the truth of the matter is you come out of a relationship the wrong way, and you can be dealing with some depression or some after effects. There's trauma in
Listen,
our lives. There's so much.
You know what, Miss Rhonda, girl, you got me over here flailing my arms to Jesus. You got me hugging myself and rocking back and forth, girl. I swear
Yeah, we go quiet as a community when we need to be talking and speaking out. It's therapeutic to tell your story, but a lot of times we feel a little embarrassed, or we worried about people making fun. Look, we are dying. We are dying much sooner than we need to be, just because of something as basic as education. Proper access to resources that will change your life. If you leave people to live in the same cycles that don't get them anywhere and make them feel lesser than, then you contribute to an early death. And in DC, we have a lot of low income citizens that are impacted by low death realities. And we've got to do something about it, because our children are going to inherit these cycles.
Yes. And when
Before we
you
move
said
on,
that, it brought back this haiku that I used to say. I came up with this in 2010. I said, without a struggle, there is no story. Without a story, there is no testimony. And without a testimony, others won't know how good God can be. Y'all better come on here.
I feel you, sis. And I'll just say this really briefly. You got to go through to get through.
Come on now. You're going to have me preaching.
I'm about to kick a foot out like the Rock.
Yeah.
Charles is Dutton. You remember when you kicked that foot out? I'm about to kick it
out. Before we move on, I want to pay some bills and acknowledge some sponsors that we finally are able to get on board. Shout out to K&C Sparkles Catering Services. This is K&C's menu and contact information. They're on social media. The food is good. Specifically, I can account for the banana pudding, which is my favorite dessert.
Nice.
But this is a small DC business and a very, very awesome young Black woman who has just been taking things by storm, and I really am proud of her, and she is really upgraded. I remember when she first started. So if you can, be sure to look up K&C Sparkles on social media. There's the contact information again. Also, give her a call, and check out some of this good food. I mean, this is home cooked food. You would think that you got it from South Carolina, North Carolina, somewhere.
That's awesome.
I
love our small business owners in DC. We have over 75,000, and what many people don't realize is that our small business core are employing roughly half our worker force, 48%. And so we've got to do better to empower our small business folks. And many wealthy, independent folks are self-employed individuals. And so there's so much that we can do as a nation's capital to be an example. And I'm so excited to be able to have these kinds of conversations, because we got to bring our people from out the shadows. We must.
Yes. And Ms. Rhonda, I'm glad you brought that up, because I am one of the small business owners in DC. I own Hyler Emergency Preparedness, which I actually worked with some people to get the street vendors of 14th Street ready for the COVID pandemic. I've helped people get ready for the floods that happen here in DC when we get heavy storms or rains. I'm a woman of many talents, but the main things I focus on are emergency preparedness, being a doula, a DC notary, and a wedding officiant. And
I
Go
love
ahead.
hearing that. I just love hearing that. You are a powerhouse. I love that you're offering the doula services because obviously there's another failed area that we are facing in our healthcare in terms of giving birth in the city. Whether it's giving birth or trauma east of the river, you don't want to be caught needing healthcare services. And so there's a lot that we have to address. And small business owners such as yourself are helping us to bridge the gap where we're failing. I am an insurance broker. I was a former real estate broker. And what I understand about insurance is that most wealthy people used insurance as an introduction to that. And that goes back to us needing to educate and support our small business owners and our citizens so that you have the same accesses. There's something called the Secure Act 2.0 where small businesses have to offer what they call retirement plans, pre-tax and retirement plans to employees. And it gives the small business owners an opportunity to gain a credit when doing so and being penalized if you don't. So there are conversations that we must have, lady, in order that we can secure the work that you're already doing and then make so that you are a resource to bring other citizens into the fold. And we're going to do that. We're going to do it because there's no reason why we should not already be a strong nation's capital of independent business owners and progressive tax-paying citizens. There are conversations we're having that we should not be dealing with, such as people sleeping in the street, not getting access to proper health care in 2025. So much so that the impending president says he's coming here to clean us up, and we're supposed to believe that in a 45-minute meeting between him and Bowser, that all of a sudden all is good. No. We must stand up.
Speaking of the things that the mayor, that we feel like that there has been shortcoming. I hate to cut you off, but I try to keep it to an hour for sure. I just wanted your opinion on this. I know that I heavily criticized it the first mayoral election, and it's just getting done. This new council took the snow day actually, and approved the Washington Teachers Union contract. We know that the first contract was approved terribly late. It showed no appreciation for our teachers. In fact, it included back pay for our teachers because they hadn't been getting paid properly. And this is a new unprecedented. Usually the contracts are about 3 years. This one is 5 years. So we think that the council and the mayor has turned over a new leaf when it comes to respecting our teachers union. What would you have done differently? How would you have handled this over these past 6 years of negotiations? And also, how would you retain teachers? We have a huge problem retaining teachers, and not just teachers, but as you talk about mental health, we have a huge problem maintaining mental health professionals. So, what would be your plan for those two areas?
Absolutely. And as a mental health advocate, in the absence of knowing or having someone admit, we look at behaviors, because behaviors tell the story. And so when we look at this mayor, isn't it interesting that the teachers' contracts have been a consistent theme, whether it's prior to the elections or right after the elections? And it makes you wonder, a mayor who can pull together a $600 million net, because it's not just about the $515 million that went to Leonis, but also the tax breaks, the $87 million in tax breaks of DC taxpayer money. So it makes you wonder why it is that she can come through and save these $600 million transactions, but not do something as smart as acknowledge and properly take care of our teaching population in a city that struggles with truancy and minimal mental health resources. So I'm happy to see that the council has finally come around. But the truth of the matter is, Michael, to go back to what I said before, I'd like to see this council get to a proactive understanding instead of reacting.
Reactive,
We're
yeah.
always celebrating something that should have already been done. And guess what? As we saved the teacher's contract, we had December 31st be the last day of the circulator service. And I'm going to keep speaking on that because they were awarded a 5-year contract only to find out a few months later that their jobs were ending. And so again, I want an audit. I want to understand why so many working class citizens in the district have to continuously feel that they're under attack. And the fact that we can't retain proper teachers and teaching populations to help teach our citizens says more about how we've handled them professionally as a whole. Those environments are challenging. Citizens that need mental health and don't have those services, households that are sending kids to school that don't have any heat or hot water. There's a big challenge in our city to address core issues. And when you don't address core issues, then we find ourselves chasing the issues. So of course it's a great thing that the council stepped up, but they have so many things that they still need to step up on. We're just not in front of it, we're behind it. And again, this mayor manages a $21 billion budget. It's time to understand where our dollars and cents are going, because we know. Yeah, well, I'd like to get away from speculating. I'd like to just know.
I know for sure because she stole $87 million from Park Morton that was due to be given to us for our TOPA and DOPA rights. So it's going in her pocket.
So believe me, I like the idea of lighting the torch. I love the idea of having these types of conversations, because when the true DC citizens show up and have these conversations, then we can do something about the leadership. But as long as we allow them to keep us quiet and in the shadows, we don't get to call it out. And Michael, when we talk about our council in the wake of just now having them reconfirmed and one that had to apologize in his reconfirmation, all I could think about as I watched that was we've got to raise the standards.
Yes, Lord.
We're going to get anything different.
Dr. Hamilton, I was wondering, probably one of the agencies, I really like the idea of the audits. Probably one of the agencies you may want to audit, probably top 5 maybe, is the Department of Small Local Business Development.
Absolutely.
Who are they helping and how and why?
Absolutely. And those contracts have been steered. We don't hear a lot about the lawsuits that are coming up. For example, DDOT, when we dealt with this DC circulator situation, right at the same time, we had lawsuits going on for contractors who were steering contracts on the inside and taking the money. And so again, when we don't audit or hold them accountable, it's the stories that we're not aware about that we're being taxed on that we don't realize. Look at how many members in her deputy mayor administration we had to settle lawsuits or deal with sexual harassment realities, or there has to be a standard that we as taxpayers demand. And it seems like they get elected and show up or not show up and start dictating the narrative. And we sit there and watch it knowing that it's flawed, but we don't show up in those voter booths. And that's why it's important to come back and reconnect with the citizens, because the citizens don't even realize that they hold the power. What would it look like if, 30,000 DC citizens showed up and wanted an audit? They pay attention. And the reality is that because the Congressional Committee of Oversight, Housing, Accountability and Oversight oversee our budget and our laws, many of us are not familiar with just what that represents. And so when they talk to us about this national election and who should be in that White House, I just remind people that whether it was blue in the White House or red in the White House, our local citizen lives have not been impacted properly, fairly.
Yeah, we see what happens when audits happen, such as DCHA, the Housing Authority. Entire cabinets resign, right?
Absolutely. Look Look at what happened with DC Youth and Rehabilitation Service. What's the first thing she said when she appointed her interim director? They did an audit, and then they come out and report all of this foul play. Of course, there's a culture. In my opinion, there's a culture in our town that has allowed this pay for play process to exist. When I ran into many of the small business owners were complaining because in order to get access to grants, you had to pay someone in the mayor's administration to get these applications done. And people are not inclined to really speak up because they don't want to be targeted, because it's not popular to speak out, because it could mean the difference in your livelihood.
Yes, Lord, come on.
You know, in theory, every year, you know, the council's supposed to do these oversights, which could be a pseudo audit. But, you know, when you have a $20 billion budget and you have 13 people on the council and maybe 2 or 3 council staff, you're talking about 20 people pouring over this huge thing, so many agencies. It's not happening. The auditing, the oversight really isn't so superficial. But let me try, because I'm resonating with a lot what you're saying, Dr. Hamilton, but there's a contrast here that I'm hoping you can help me reconcile. On your RhondaHamilton4DC.com website, I really appreciated what you said about gentrification as sort of a continuation of the colonial project. I think you said, quote unquote, similar to colonialism, gentrification not only usurps local and economic power to newer and offer wealthier residents, but there's also implied class and racial components attached to it as well. And you kind of discussed that. And we know with gentrification, obviously, it's directly connected to displacement, homelessness, housing costs going up. If you can, though, reconcile with me this sort of one solution or reaction to this, because obviously with gentrification, with homelessness, we're going to see an increase in petty crime. We're going to see an increase in thefts. People are pushed to the wall. And what I'm seeing on another page on your site is a response to crime is sort of to let the dogs loose from the police. I mean, in this case, I guess in DC, it's drones, it's drug zones, it's stop and frisk. It's all of these things that disproportionately affect the same people who are being displaced. So can you help me reconcile those two sort of concepts?
I appreciate that. And I love that you are transparent in your feelings of conflict. I want us to understand that as a civilized society and as the nation's seat of governance, we must be the example. The reality, I'll ask a question with gentrification, which is what I ask often. What does gentrification without relocation look like? Because we always associate the gentrification with relocation as if that is the only way to deal with it. I say oftentimes, as a former real estate broker and a current insurance broker, the reality of our schools growing and us having equity growth in our property ownerships and things of that nature should not be a negative thing, but we must be intentional in the preservation of equity, making sure that as we improve in our growth and our neighborhood understandings, that we're not leaving or pushing people out. To do that, we must educate. We must be intentional about educating our citizens and providing access to the resources, which is why it's so important to make sure that the monies that we're allocating are appropriately being done so, and that we're getting the impact that we deserve. Now let's shift gears and let's talk about the downside of this, our populations that are affected or directly affected by this gentrification. Because the gentrification approach has not been balanced, has not been intentional, has not made sure to access the families that are immediately being impacted, what's happening is that those frustrations are growing into other behaviors. And so we have this crime. We must not be afraid to set a standard, But we must take comfort in knowing that in setting the standard, we're also accountable in the resources that we're providing. We're also accountable to the equity that we're preserving. We don't want folks to be able to feel that because they feel victimized, it's okay to pull a gun out. There must be a standard. Now, as far as our police are concerned, I just spoke on the Hill a couple of weeks back, both to the police and to the clergy. We must have responsible leadership across the board so that our citizens can understand what we expect of them. We can't be a nation's capital where people are afraid as soon as dark hits. You know, we can't live like that. And the reality is that as much as we have bad actors, we also have a lack of proper education and resources that are happening. So we fall prey to these cycles. Look, I was raised in a DC where I felt pride in going in Ward 1, 2, 3, 8, 7, 6, any day of the week. It didn't matter. And the truth of the matter is our city is becoming sectioned off. We have to get back to living and governing standards that holds our citizens accountable. And if we're properly allocating resources and making efforts to get our folks educated and making sure that the equity preservation is intact, then we can go back to proper and responsible policing. But we can't have that without respect and trust. And that's why I'm about core issue items. So on the surface, I can agree and understand with your conflict, but I'm simply pushing that we get back to a civilized way of operating and accountable leadership so that we can stop questioning when it's necessary for the law to act, right? But when the law acts inappropriately, then they got to be held accountable. And see, I believe that leadership starts from top down. And this current leadership has not been a great representation for these other systems of ours not to run afoul.
I often wonder what the police are actually getting paid for. Because I had a run-in with the cop, not a run-in, but I inquired as to the post office up here on Georgia Avenue, right by Morton Street. I went there today to mail a package, and I pulled up, and there was a vehicle in the handicap spot, which is becoming all too common in this city. And these little expensive cars, the Range Rovers and the Teslas and all these things, parking in the handicap spots without a placard and without tags. So when I pulled up and saw that, and the police sitting directly across from it, right in the same parking lot as Sweat DC, and I get out and I say, "Excuse me, officer, I'm just wondering, were you aware that they don't have a placard or handicap tags in it?" He was like, "Why are you yelling?" I said, "I'm not yelling. I just talk loud. You're just taking it that way." And then he kept cutting me off, but then he would gaslight me saying I was cutting him off. And I'm like, you know what? He's like, "I'm going to do you a courtesy and you can park right." Don't do me no favors. I can go to another post office.
Yeah. Let's have a real conversation, because not that that's not one, but let's talk a year or so before that incident happens. Because I mean, I'm a mental health advocate, and like I said, I look at behavior, and no one's off the list, right? Behavior tells us a lot. There was a movement to defund police. I'm sure you heard of it, right?
Yeah.
And regardless of what you're thinking about it, if you're for it or against it, the way that it was rolled out, in my opinion, was very irresponsible. For one, we have budgets and we set budgets. If there needs to be a change or an adjustment, then there needs to be a proper way to do so, right? But because politics were involved, it became a public thing. We're going to defund the police and take money to fix mental health. Now, I know we need to fix mental health, and I want to see that happen. But when you do it so publicly, it almost pits the police against the cause itself. And the reality is that if I am a wife or mother or family member of a police officer who gets up every day and puts that uniform on and goes to police in communities where the mental health resources are short, where the housing circumstances are low, where people are as frustrated as we know our citizens to be, then that is a job where I put my life on the line every day. But that doesn't mean that I'm going to give a pass to someone who's not willing to do their job. And so when you put band-aids on real problems in the Black communities, especially, there is an issue with there's no longer an officer friendly understanding. When I came along, there was an officer friendly relationship. We've gotten away from that. And the only way we get back to a amicable relationship in our communities with the police is that there has to be respect on both sides. And if we don't have leadership that supports that, then we got to again start at the root cause. So I believe that there are relationships in our policing community that we must work on, but there are also relationships in our own communities that we also equally have to hold accountable if we're going to build something that we can all appreciate.
So, Ms. Rhonda, we got to wrap up the show, but how can people, the listeners, the subscribers, and any of the general public, how can they reach out to you with their questions, concerns, and just to have a friendly chat about some of the things that are going on in their neighborhoods?
I like hearing that, and I love that you guys are referencing the Rhonda Hamilton #4dc.com. That is an informational site so that you can begin to become familiar with the things that I believe will help us to be a better DC. And keep in mind, I'm not a yes person, and I don't look for yes people. I'm looking to reconnect with our citizens because I intend to be the mayor for the entire district of citizens and not just the ones that are existing in circles or that have certain zeros behind their name. If we're truly going to fix DC and have it be a city, a capital city where we all enjoy, then we must bring the voices back to the table. And I'm ready to have those conversations. So www.rhonda, RHONDA, Hamilton, 4dc.com is a way you can reach me through my website. 202-486-6037 is one of 4 phones that I carry, and it is my campaign phone, which I will pick up. We've got a host of community events that are going to be coming soon, and I hope that I can send them through to you all so you can get them out to your public. My sole responsibility in my belief of being successful will rest with getting our DC citizens back to the table to talk about these issues and so many more. And then before I go, I'm going to throw salt in the wound and say, when we talk about the council doing audits and so many agencies, I'm going to ask you, would someone, I'll just randomly say, since we don't pick on Mr. White, Trayon White or Mr. Robert White, Anita Bonds and this Fort Myer construction issue and the dumping of hazardous waste in our river, would these be the type of leaders that we want to help us understand improper understandings in our government agencies and money allocations or contract understandings? We've got to talk about it, and no one can be off the list if we're truly going to build a DC that we can all appreciate. And I'm leading the charge. Thank you all.
Thanks so much for your time, Dr. Hamilton. Thank you for your time. And I think Shante, are we cutting this off now, or is Pastor Mike coming back?
Not yet.
Pastor Mike he do the closing.
We want to thank you, Dr. Hamilton. You definitely can send us. You already know me on social media. I'm always a lot of followers. I always put stuff out there for people to see. So you definitely can send us that. Send it to the People's Voice DC page as well. So we definitely enjoyed this conversation. Actually, after you announced that you were running, we definitely need to have you back because we have so much more we could talk to you for about 4 or 5 episodes.
I'm looking forward to it. Look, whenever you want to have this conversation, let's have it. Thank you all for your patience again, and thank you. Let's keep this conversation honest. Politics is not popular in our town. Let's change that so that our citizens have the power.
Amen.
Yes, indeed.
Right on.
That's
Amen.
a good note to go out on right there.
As we go out, I want to remind everyone to be safe. This is our weather for the next 7 days. Tonight and tomorrow is going to be extremely windy. So please, as we say in church, govern yourselves. accordingly. Um, Also, I do want to announce that we at the Rising Voices of Politics are opening up a book club. We're starting up a book club. If you are interested, please join with us. You can see the email Rising Voices DC. You can also send a text to our line. Is The text is at 202-670-9110. As we leave, I'd like to tell all our listeners and viewers thank you. And in honor of the upcoming Martin Luther King holiday, I'd like to leave everyone with a video right here. Enjoy your hump day.
Welcome to Kids Academy.
As you know, every year we celebrate Martin Luther King's Day. But do you know that King is the only person in American history, apart from George Washington, whose memory is honored by a national holiday? Why is that if Martin Luther King wasn't even a president? Well, while George Washington created American government, Martin Luther King Jr. made Americans truly united. He fought for equality. Amazing. But he didn't use any weapons. He fought just with words, and he won. It all started in his childhood in Atlanta, Georgia in the 1930s. Mike, that was Martin Luther King's childhood name, had a white playmate. They were best friends till they turned 6 and had to go to separate schools. One day, his friend told Mike that his father demanded them not to play together anymore. Mike was greatly shocked. That's when his parents explained to him about the segregation. It meant that black people had to sit separately from white people in buses and restaurants, use separate bathrooms, and even go to separate schools. White people in southern states thought it was natural to mistreat black people, even after abolishing slavery in 1865. Martin Luther King was angry that white people broke him up with his buddy. Since then, he started noticing inequality everywhere. Once, he was traveling with his dad on a bus, and they were pushed away from seats reserved for white people, having to stand up for 90 miles. Another day, a clerk in a shoe shop required Martin Luther King Jr. and his father to be serviced at the back of the shop. They refused. As that kept happening, King's idea to fight segregation became stronger. Martin Luther King was a bright student. He entered college at the age of 15. Later on, studying at a seminary, he learned about Mahatma Gandhi, a leader from India who fought for human rights in nonviolent or peaceful way. In 1955, Martin Luther King started his civil rights activism by helping to organize the bus boycott against racial segregation in buses. All black people in Montgomery, Alabama refused to drive or ride public buses for 1 year. King was put in jail for it, but the peaceful protest ended the segregation in city buses. That was his first victory. In 12 years of his activism, Martin Luther King gave 2,500 public speeches and was in prison 30 times, but he never gave up. More than 250,000 people listened to his most famous speech called "I Have a Dream" that he gave in 1963. Soon after that, American government passed the Civil Rights Act in 1963 that made racial discrimination illegal. And the year after, Martin Luther King won a Nobel Prize for his peaceful stand for equality. Millions of Americans supported Martin Luther King, although some people were against his ideas. He was only 39 when he tragically died at the hands of a villain. However, Martin Luther King's words and peaceful actions changed American society forever. That's why the U.S. government created a national holiday in his honor.
Decades, generations, I don't